Hi, I'm Sarah with the Volusia County Public Library System, coming to you from the Ormond Beach Regional Library. And on this episode of Volusia Gets Crafty, I'm going to walk you through the basics on how to read written patterns and crochet diagrams. We'll look at some common abbreviations and symbols, as well as how patterns are typically formatted. Then we'll work through a couple videos together using some written patterns and crochet diagrams. But up next, I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer and show you some beginner pattern basics.
Okay, so today we're going to work on learning how to read crochet patterns and diagrams. So when it comes to patterns, there's a lot of places that you can find them. Books are a great resource. The library, we obviously have a lot of those, so they're for free, obviously, at the library. If you purchase a book, then you're going to have to pay for the patterns within. You can also use Hoopla, one of our free digital platforms, to get ebooks and find the patterns there for free as well. Each brand of yarn will also have a website that you can visit. On that website, you'll find free patterns that you can download and print out and follow. So that's another place that you can look. Often those patterns will use the yarn that company manufactures. So it's a one-stop shopping kind of thing. Often on the inside bands of the skeins of yarn, on the inside of those bands, there will be a free pattern that you get once you purchase that skein of yarn. So that's another place you can find a pattern. Also online, there are community-based crochet websites, and a lot of them have people that create patterns for free for the general public. Some are paid patterns though, so you want to be sure that you know what you're doing when you get into that. Another place you can find some patterns are magazines. Now you purchase the magazine obviously to get the patterns inside, but we're lucky here at Volusia Libraries because we offer a free digital download called Flipster. And through that download you can get all magazines that you can think of for free. And one of them is Crochet with an exclamation point at the end. And you'll find free patterns there as well. So a lot of different places that you can find patterns, but the setup with them is usually very similar. It will start with explaining the type of yarn that you need. So I kind of blew this up, so hopefully you can see it a little bit. But it starts by talking about the brand of yarn, which is Karen, and the type of yarn that you'll need. This one is called 1 pound. Then it'll show the color that's requiring for the pattern that you'll often see in the picture, and then how many balls or skeins of yarn you'll need to complete the project as it's written. Then it'll list the size of crochet hook that you'll need to complete the project. Some people go by letters, USJ, or a 6mm crochet hook. I often go by the millimeters is how I do it. Or it says size needed to obtain gauge. Gauge is something that you tend to be more concerned with if you're making something that you're going to wear, like a garment, like a sweater, or an accessory like a hat. You want the sizing on those to be on point or they won't fit you. So what it boils down to with gauge is that each person crochets a little bit differently. Some people crochet a little bit looser, and as a result their project might be bigger. Some people are tighter crocheters, so as a result their project might be a little smaller. So gauge is then referenced in your pattern. And this particular example, it says 10 double crochets and 5 rows will equal 4 inches. And what that means is that if you chained a length and you did 10 double crochets back along that chain, and you did that for 5 rows, you would end up with a square that should measure 4 inches by 4 inches. If it doesn't, and you're bigger, then you're a looser crocheter, and you would want to size down with the hook that you need until when you create that square, you get a 4-inch. Likewise, if you do the sample and it's a lot smaller than the 4 inches, then you're probably a tighter crocheter and you need to size up with your hook so that it will fit that gauge. And it's just something you need to play around with, but typically with blankets and things like that, I don't get too concerned with gauge. And you shouldn't either, unless you're getting into some more fancy garments and things like that, which as a beginner, most people don't try to tackle anyway. So that's a little bit about gauge and the crochet hook that you need to use to obtain it. Then patterns will move on to some common abbreviations that are included in the pattern. And it's just taking like what we've learned, a chain, and that abbreviation is going to be a CH. Another one we've done is a double crochet, that's a DC. Slip stitch is an SL, ST. And space is SP. So those are just a few of them. I've got a little cheat sheet. You're probably not going to be able to see this. It's very small. But it has a list of common abbreviations and what they mean. One of the main things I wanted to talk about is patterns will include stars or parentheses or brackets. What those mean, and it sometimes throws people off, is when you see those in a pattern, it means you're going to repeat that section of the pattern a certain number of times. So it's something that we'll get to when we do our projects walking through a crochet pattern together. When you look at the actual pattern, they're usually set up with the instructions at the top, any special instructions, as well as an explanation of how you would do a certain kind of a stitch. So if there's a stitch that's special to this particular pattern, like say a shell, remember where we did a whole bunch of double crochets into one stitch, it makes like a fan shape. For one particular pattern, a shell may consist of like 5 double crochets, but for another pattern, a shell may consist of more than that, like maybe 7. So at the beginning of the pattern is where it will tell you what a shell equals. So you'll want to be sure to read that. Also, before the body of the pattern starts, it will sometimes give you information about color sequencing. So if you like the look of the picture and the pattern that you want to create, if you want to mimic that, it will tell you the sequence of how you should use your colors. So that all starts before you get into the main body of the written pattern. And that is separated into each round or row. Now we can see here first round, RND, and that would mean round. So we know that this starts with a circle and it works out in rounds. But it will usually put them in bold so that you can work step by step through each round. And then at the very end, it may walk you through, if it's a motif like a granny square, it will walk you through how to join those together. It may also walk you through, if it's just a regular blanket, how to add a border onto the outside of it or add tassels as extra decoration. So that's a little bit about how the actual written patterns work. We'll get more into it on one of our projects that we've got coming up here in just a moment. So if you're more interested in learning things visually, another great example, instead of written patterns, are the crochet diagrams. What they're going to do is, instead of using those abbreviations that we saw, they're going to use symbols. Now the symbols are nice because you can arrange them in any fashion, like this example here. This is an example of a granny square. And it arranges the symbols so that it actually looks like the project you're going to create. So instead of using words that you have to read and piece together, you can see immediately what you're going to create, which is kind of nice. And in the world of crochet, the symbols are typically universal and standard. So each pattern that you look at will use similarly shaped symbols. They often look like the stitch that they represent. So for a single crochet, that's the only one that you can sometimes see two. It's either an X or a plus sign in patterns. But the rest of them are pretty standard. The half double crochet just has like a little T. It has a hat on top. The double crochet looks like that, but it also has a little hash mark in the center. The triple crochet has 2 hash marks. So how I remember it is, remember when you do a half double crochet, you yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. You just pull through once. So there's the 1 hat at the top. When you do a double crochet, you pull through 2 loops on your hook twice, right? So there's the hash mark and the hat. There's the 2 pull throughs. So that's kind of how I remember it. But as you can see, remember the single crochet is the shortest stitch, and the symbol is also very small. And with each one, the half double crochet would be the next biggest. Double crochet is a little bit bigger than that. Triple or treble crochet is a little bit bigger than that. So you can see that each of the symbols gets progressively longer so that you can identify them easier in your patterns. Now this key has a lot of different special stitches as well, and we're familiar with the 5 double crochet shell here, where they are all going into 1 stitch. We also did the front post double crochet in our sand dollar coaster. So it looks like a double crochet with the hat and the little hash mark, but it also has this little loop because remember we went around the post too. So this is just a small key. There's a lot, even a lot more than this that you can find for symbols. But what I wanted to show you on an example pattern, we're not going to do this one because it's a granny square and we've already been there, done that, right? But I wanted to show you how to read a diagram. So this one starts in the center with the chain. And you can see each of these rounds are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this has 7 rounds to it, at least this part of the pattern does. And you would start by reading this to the left of the number, because anytime you read a diagram in the round, you read it counterclockwise until you get back to the top, and then where you slip stitch. Then you start your next round, and again you read it counterclockwise. Now if you're doing a pattern that you chain a long length and you work your way across it, that looks a little different from this. And I have one of those projects that we're going to create here in just a little bit. But what you'll do is you'll work your chain, and then it'll say row 1 at the right hand side. So you'll work from right to left, then you'll go up a row and you'll work from left to right, up a row, right to left. So it kind of builds upon itself. But this is just a brief introduction to how the diagrams work. It's important to learn how to do the written patterns the most, because there's always going to be a written pattern available for a project. There's not always going to be a diagram. These are an extra. I think they're a little bit newer, but they don't always accompany a written pattern. So they're nice. I love them. They're my preference to read instead of the written words, but you don't always have the opportunity to use them. So it's important to learn how to read the written patterns the most, and then these are an extra, because sometimes it can be difficult to read one or the other. So if you've got both, it can be helpful. So this is just a basic introduction. Didn't want to overwhelm you with too much into how to read written patterns and crochet diagrams. And we're going to be using them to create a couple projects. One is this shamrock garland. And then we'll have another video here with how to create this twilight shells throw. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can check out more like it on Volusia Library's YouTube channel. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.